I am on the Delaware River looking downstream, and I'm just upstream of the Delaware Water Gap. So the point where Route 80 crosses the Delaware River is downstream of here, as is the point where the Delaware Lackawanna and Western Railroad used to cross. And that right there is, this side is the New Jersey side, so that would be the Worthington State Forest, and across the way is the Pennsylvania side. And of note here is actually this set of pillars here, which used to be the bridge where the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad used to cross the Delaware River. So the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad originated in New Jersey near New York, and it traveled through a circuitous route through upper New Jersey. Then it actually merged up with the Blairstown Railroad, so that was the railroad that originated at Blairstown. It was built by Mr. Blair, and it connected with the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad in Delaware. That's the railroad that went under the Pollenskill Viaduct. And the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad would have bought that railroad out and used it as part of its route through here. And from the Blairstown Railroad, the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad basically snakes along the Delaware River in along pretty much the same path as Route 80, and then it follows the road I took to get into, or it took the same path as the road I took to get into the state forest, and it crossed the river at this point here. And the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad would have basically been a freight railroad, and it operated until 1861 when it went bankrupt. And actually for a while the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad was controlled by the Erie Railroad, so the Erie Railroad would have had a majority stake in the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad. But in 1961 this railroad went bankrupt, and they actually were going to completely liquidate the railroad. And one good thing though is this railroad did manage to avoid getting folded into Conrail, because there's no telling what Conrail would have done to this railroad. But they were actually able to save the majority of the track of the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad. It's actually operated as a short line now. So there's the original route from near New York City through northern New Jersey is still operated by a short line, but they abandoned this section of the railroad. So the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad now just goes up through Sparta, New Jersey, and then it uses the line of the Delaware Hudson Railroad up into New York, where it merges with a number of other railroads. I believe it uses the tracks of the Norfolk Southern through Port Jervis and through to Binghamton, New York, where it meets up with the northern part of the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad. And I believe that the route that it's using now is actually part of the original route of the Erie Railroad. But as I said, the portion of this line from Sparta, New Jersey down along will be along the southern side of this portion of the Appalachian Mountains through the Water Gap. That portion has been abandoned, which unfortunately includes all of the Blairstown Railroad as well. And I guess one other thing of interest is this railroad actually crossed the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad 2 times. It crossed once under the Pollenskill Viaduct, as I showed you in a previous video, but it also would have crossed the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad again right near the Delaware Viaduct, so right near where the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad would have crossed the Route 80 and the Delaware River. There's another bridge right next to it that this railroad used to go under. It's now a side road it's now used as a road, now holds a feeder road for Route 80. But yeah. And there's actually a couple of structures back in the Worthington State Forest itself, which may or may not have been associated with the railroad. There's another pillar in the back there, and then there's If you look around here, there's actually that embankment there, and there's some structures that used to be along there as well. There's some steps or something like that. I am now on the eastern pillar of the bridge, so I'm standing on the New Jersey side and looking at the Pennsylvania side again. And this is the pillar of the bridge. And behind me, that path there would have been the original path of the right-of-way of the railroad. So the railroad would have snaked along the eastern New Jersey, the New Jersey side of the Delaware River through the Delaware Water Gap under the Delaware Viaduct, and eventually traveled through northern New Jersey. And I believe this railroad actually ended in Hackensack, New Jersey, which is right across the Hudson River from New York City. And the bridge itself was originally a steel truss bridge. And as I said, this line was abandoned in 1961, so the bridge was probably removed sometime shortly after that. And just another view of the New Jersey pillar of the bridge. And you can see down there the step structure which makes up this pillar. And you can also notice that there originally used to be parts of the pillars jutting upstream, which would have helped to prevent debris and such from, probably ice and debris from piling up on the upstream banks or the upstream sides of the pillars. There was something like that as well on the Delaware Viaduct that I looked at, which would have been quite a ways upstream of this, but on the same river. Just to give you some idea of how they would have constructed this portion of the railroad, you can see that cut on that side. The river's on that side, and they would have had to basically make a cut through that rock right there, and in order to create the flat railroad bed. So constructing a railroad along the New Jersey bank of the river through this mountainous region would have been rather difficult. I am on the former railroad bed of the New York, Susquehanna and Western Railroad, and actually noticed this right here, which is a giant sinkhole. So just to give orientation, that right there is the Delaware River, and this is the upslope side of the railroad, so that would be the Worthington State Forest in that direction. And I noticed this huge sinkhole. So this path here would have all been artificially laid dirt, which they laid when they constructed the railroad. And it appears that over time this dirt has been washed away and eroded away, and they had created this massive sinkhole. So I'm guessing it would have been to the back there. Let's see if I can get my flash on. So it doesn't look like my flash is helping too much, but it looks like this sinkhole is about almost 10 feet deep to the base of it. So that gives you an idea of how, well, first of all, how much dirt they had to lay to construct this railroad bed. But yeah, the railroad bed would have continued in that direction through that shrubbery over there. And back there, this is the direction past that cut I showed you, that's right there, and towards the bridge. Here's another sinkhole in the railroad bed. And you can actually see, I guess, that there is the railroad bed as it travels through shrubbery. But you can see the type of dirt and loose rock that they would have built this railroad bed out of. And that's distinctively different from the hard rock that makes up the bed of this area. And the fact that this railroad bed is made of loose dirt like this is why there are these sinkholes in it. Just another shot of the New Jersey side of the bridge. So right now I'm standing on what would have been the railroad bed. So the railroad bed would have proceeded through that there, and that's the cut that I showed you before. But what I noticed that's interesting is that someone actually put a photograph of what the original bridge would have looked like. So it would have been a metal truss bridge, a steel truss bridge. And it actually looks like it would have been similar to quite a few of the other bridges that I photographed, such as the bridge over near Nessianic Station. It's unfortunate they couldn't have found some reason to leave this bridge intact so we could at least see the actual trusses of the bridge as well. One more thing I wanted to take a picture of is this here, which is the bridge where the New York, Susquehanna and Western Railroad would have passed under the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western Railroad. So you see this bridge was built in 1909 along with, it was built as part of the Lackawanna cutoff. And actually Route 80, you can probably hear it in the background, is just in that general direction here. And that would be where the Delaware Viaduct is, where the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western crossed over the Delaware River. But this is where the New York, Susquehanna and Western Railroad passed under it. So it actually passed under the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad in two places, here and at the Scale Viaduct. And this is facing north, so this would lead around the Delaware Water Gap and to the bridge that I showed you before. And so here it actually would have traveled along the route of Route 80, and then it would have taken a turn to the east direction and followed the Blairstown Railroad through Haynesburg, Blairstown, and northern New Jersey. Just to give you some idea of where this bridge is located, this is the bridge where the New York, Susquehanna and Western passed under the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western. That up there is the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western's railroad bed, and that in the background there is Route 80. You can probably see the cars and trucks on it. And that concrete structure there is actually a part of the Delaware Viaduct. So this is very close to the Delaware Viaduct and the Delaware River. And one more shot of this bridge.